guys! So after you all enjoyed my Penguin Modern Classics collection video so much, I thought perhaps I would do another one of those type of videos, and in this instance I'm going to show you all of my vintage red spine classics. So this range can include books from antiquity to Shakespeare, all the way to books that were published in the last couple of decades and might be considered modern classics. And I have a range of books in this series, some which I've read, some which I haven't, but we will go through them one by one. So without further ado, let's have a look at the books. So first up are two books by the same author, and those are both by W. Somerset Maugham. Now, one of the things I really like about the vintage red spine classics is that each author has a different illustrator. So all the covers will be different for each book, but if they're by the same author, they will be in the same style. So I think that's a really nice touch, and the W. Somerset Maugham covers are some of my favourite illustrations. The first one I have read, and that is The Magician. I love this book. This is one of my favourite classics. It was published in the very beginning of the 20th century, 1908 to be precise, and it follows a young couple who encounter this odd, eccentric, but also kind of bedazzling man who is a magician, supposedly. And it's set in Paris, and the female of the couple develops a strange obsession with this strange man, and it's as if there has been a spell put upon her, and her partner is completely distraught and doesn't understand what's going on. It's dark and wonderful and mysterious and beautifully written, and just a fabulous novel. I would highly recommend this one. But I also have The Painted Veil by W. Somerset Maugham, which I haven't read yet, but this one follows a couple again, but in this instance the wife has cheated on her husband and he decides he wants to punish her, so he forces her to accompany him on an expedition to remote mainland China where a cholera epidemic runs rampant. But from the early 20th century to antiquity, I have the vintage red spine classics edition of Euripides' Bacchae, which is a tragic play. This one is translated by Robin Robertson, and this one follows Pentheus, the king of Thebes, who has denounced the god Dionysus, the god of wine and, you know, all the fun stuff, really. But of course mortals cannot go against the gods, and Dionysus's power takes over the women in Thebes until they are hosting bacchanalias and acting like maenads and overrunning the city, much to Pentheus's dismay, and things escalate from there. This is definitely one of Euripides' most probably well-known plays. I think people are really fascinated by that whole like Dionysiac bacchanalia theme, and it is a really fascinating one. I then have Scaramucci, I think that's right, by Raphael Sabatini, which I haven't read, but let me read you the back because it sounds fabulous. It says, when André Louis witnesses the murder of his best friend by an arrogant and privileged aristocrat, he swears to avenge his death. Falling in with a travelling theatre company, he disguises himself as the character of the wily rogue Scaramucci. His ensuing adventures involve hair-raising duels, romance, treachery, and shocking family secrets, all handled with brilliance and wit by this extraordinary hero. And this is another one from the first half of the 20th century. We then have a very famous piece of late 19th century literature, and that is The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I haven't read this book. It's my most recent acquisition in the vintage red spine editions, and years ago I read maybe the first third or almost a good chunk of it, but I was a lot younger and never got around to finishing it. But I am so eager now that I have my own copy. I think I read one from the library when I was in high school, to get around to actually reading this really famous work of literature. If you're not familiar, The Picture of Dorian Gray follows a young man, Dorian Gray, who has a painting painted of him, and there is a sort of magical spell on this painting that means that the painting ages while his does not. So Dorian Gray does not age. He remains a young man and takes advantage of this by sort of giving in to all of the world's delights and desires, and just really doesn't hold back. But he can never set eyes on this painting or else he will become as aged as the painting is. So yeah, definitely need to get around to this one soon. We then have one of my favourite books I own in these editions, and that is The Bloody Chamber and Other Stories by Angela Carter. This is a collection of fairy tale retellings. We have Bluebeard, which is the title story. We have a number of retellings involving Little Red Riding Hood and a selection of others. Angela Carter's prose are absolutely stunning, and these stories are really dark and creepy and unnerving and just beautifully rendered. A really great place to go for fairy tale retellings, or if you haven't yet read any Angela Carter and are looking for somewhere to start, these are amazing. We then have Pepita by Vita Sackville West. Vita Sackville West was a contemporary of Virginia Woolf, and this is actually her account of her grandmother's life, i.e. Pepita, who was a famous dancer that then caused scandal when she ran off having an affair with an English diplomat. So the next one is actually a proof edition of a Vintage Red Classics. It was sent to me by the publishers. This is not exactly what the final thing must look like. It's been a while now since I acquired it, although I'm imagining the image on the front is the same, and that is The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage. And I haven't read this one yet, but it says on the inside, Phil and George are brothers, more than partners, joint owners of the biggest ranch in their Montana valley. Phil is the bright one, George is the plodder. Phil is tall and angular, George is stocky and silent. Phil is a brilliant chess player, a voracious reader and eloquent storyteller. George learns slowly and devotes himself to the business. Phil is a vicious sadist with a seething contempt for weakness to match his thirst for dominance. George is a gentle, loving soul. They sleep in the room they share as boys, and so it has been for 40 years. When George unexpectedly marries a young widow and brings her to live at the ranch, Phil begins a relentless campaign to destroy his brother's new wife. Sounds pretty disturbing and interesting, so I do need to get to this one at some point. Then I have to say, this next 5 selection are some of my favourite editions of Vintage Red Spine Classics, and it is a series of 5 modern Scottish classics that were brought out in these editions, which include a book I'm sure you've all heard me talk about, and that is The Dumb House by John Burnside. This is John Burnside's first novel and an amazing read. It is about a disturbed man who is obsessed with finding the original language and whether the original language is tied to the soul and whether we have a soul, so conducts some really disturbing experiments on his fellow human beings. And I'll say no more, but it's a phenomenal read, really immersive, really dark, but so fascinating. That series also includes Swing Hammer Swing by Jeff Torrington. I love this cover, by the way. This is probably one of my absolute favourite covers. This one reads, From the infamous Glasgow slum, the Gorbals, Tam Clay chronicles a week in his life. In the last days before the demolishers move in, intersecting friends, old-timers and eccentrics, navigating his pregnant wife, frisky bedfellows and debt collectors, Tam stumbles through a derelict world on an odyssey of self-discovery. We then have Paradise by A.L. Kennedy, which has always sounded a little bit to me like the Scottish version of Eat, Pray, Love, but I've not read it, so don't take my word to that. It says, almost 40 and with nothing to show for it, Hannah Luckcraft is starting to realise what her lifestyle is not sustainable. Her soul is unwell, her family is wounded, her friends are odd, her body is unreliable, and her drinking is out of control. Robert, a dissolute dentist, appears to offer a love she can understand, but he may only be one more symptom of her problem. From Scotland to Dublin, from London to Montreal, to Budapest and onwards, Hannah travels in search of the ultimate altered state, her paradise. I mean, this one could be a lot more complex than Eat, Pray, Love, but that description's always brought that to my mind. We then have Morven Collar by Alan Warner. This one's set in a remote Highland village next to a port, and it follows Morven Collar, who finds her boyfriend dead one morning when she wakes up, and then does something a little bit strange. And lastly is The Trick is to Keep Breathing by Janice Galloway. This one reads, From the corner of a darkened room, Joy Stone watches herself as memories of the deaths of her lover and mother surface unbidden. Life for Joy narrows to negotiating each day, each encounter, each second, to finding the trick to keep living. Told with shattering clarity and wry wit, this is a Scottish classic fit for our time. Another beautiful cover for this one. 4 more. The next one I have read, and that is John Fell's The Collector. This is what I think of as kind of the original stalker novel. It's from the 1960s and it's told in 2 parts. Firstly, from the perspective of a young man who becomes obsessed with a young woman in his street and plans to kidnap her. And then the second half is told from the perspective of the victim, and we get the same events recounted by both narrators, so we get their different perspectives on the situation. Definitely for fans of books like The Dumb House, again very disturbing, and if you kind of read modern stalker thrillers, I feel like this is a real inspiration behind a lot of those, so I would check this out. We then have a work of non-fiction, in fact, and that is The Ancient Art of Growing Old by Tom Paine. And this one essentially explores ancient attitudes from Greece and Rome towards aging. Simple as that. This next one might actually be my most recent acquisition. I think I got this one just after The Picture of Dorian Gray, and that is The Sound of Waves by Yukio Mishima, and this one is a Japanese novel, and I was recommended this one by a subscriber and it sounds absolutely fantastic. It's set in a Japanese fishing village and follows two young people who have fallen in love, and is apparently inspired by my favourite piece of ancient literature, which is Daphnis and Chloe by Longus. So I'm really excited to get to this one, as, like I said, my favourite piece of ancient literature and one of my top 10 books of all time. So anything even remotely inspired by that, I'm all over. And last but certainly not least is one that is significantly bigger than the rest of them. I'll show you for comparison. So this one is taller, wider, and just pretty chunky at that. This one was given to me by my friend Linda, who read it and really enjoyed it but doesn't really like to keep books, so she passed this one on to me because she thought I would like it, and it is the Gormenghast trilogy by Mervyn Peake, and it is a series of books. It's all three in the series of a dystopian trilogy. These books were first written in the 1940s, so are some of the earliest dystopian work, and I imagine they've been quite influential on the genre, and I do want to read these. I am sure I'm going to love these, but it's just so intimidating, the size. I need to think of it as 3 books really, and go into it that way, but Linda said it was amazing. I trust her opinion, so I'm really pleased to have this copy, and I'm very grateful she gave it to me. But those are all of my vintage Red Spine classics. I hope you have enjoyed this video. Do let me know if you're interested in seeing more of these in the future, and if you have any thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned in this video, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any suggestions of where I should go next with the ones I haven't read yet, I would love to hear that. I really appreciated all your feedback on the Penguin Modern Classics books I owned, because it's given me some real inspiration and enthusiasm to get to some of them ASAP, the ones I hadn't read anyway. But until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye!